Hi everyone, welcome back to DGMC. Diwan-e-Ghalib, Meri Subhani. To all our returning viewers, we are very happy you could join us again. And to the new viewers, we are delighted you discovered the podcast and decided to tune in for the first time. Now, if you were with me in the previous episode, you know that currently we are going through Ghazal 23 from Diwan-e-Ghalib, Dar-Khur-e Qahr-o-Ghazab Jab Koi Hamsa Na Hua. We have already posted 8 episodes for the 8 couplets. Today we are going to get into the 9th couplet, the matla of the ghazal, the last couplet. As always, I'm going to read the couplet first and then we will pick up the keywords, concepts and the impression. So this is how it goes. थी खबर गर्म कि गालिब के उड़ेंगे पुरजे, थी खबर गर्म कि गालिब के उड़ेंगे पुरजे, देखने हम भी गए थे पर तमाशा ना हुआ. A very interesting couplet, as you can already make out. So let's do a quick approximate translation. First line, थी खबर गर्म कि गालिब के उड़ेंगे पुरजे. There was a hot rumor that Ghalib will be torn to pieces and these pieces will fly all over the place. Second line, देखने हम भी गए थे पर तमाशा न हुआ. Even we went to watch this, but the spectacle never happened. So that's a very approximate translation of this couplet. Now we are going to pick the keywords first and then get into the impression. First line, khabar. Now khabar, as you know, it's not a very complex word. We still use it in today's vocabulary. Khabar stands for news, some kind of information, sometimes a report, a notice, right? But usually news. मिर्ज़ा गालिब का ही ये शेर देखें, है खबर गर्म उनके आने की, है खबर गर्म उनके आने की, आज ही घर में बोरिया ना हुआ. So the approximate translation is, the news is hot about her coming to visit. Alas, today itself my house doesn't have the mat. Now, boria is a kind of a coarse rug mat, but in today's language you would call it some kind of furnishing or a carpet. So Ghalib says, damn, today I've received the hot news that she's going to visit, and today of all the days I just don't seem to have that fancy carpet available in the house. So the house will not be furnished adequately for her arrival. मीर तकी मीर का शेर, तेज यूं ही ना थी शब आतिशे शौक, तेज यूं ही ना थी शब आतिशे शौक, थी खबर गर्म उसके आने की. So again, the approximate translation is, it's not without reason that last night the flame of my desire was burning very bright. It was not without reason, because the news of her arrival was hot. So basically, because she was going to arrive, the flame of desire was burning really bright. And then Ahmad Mushtaq ka ye शेर, मुझे उसने तेरी खबर दी है, मुझे उसने तेरी खबर दी है, जिसने हर शाम को सहर दी है. Beautiful couplet, right? The approximate translation is, the one who has informed me about you. The one who has informed me about you is the one who gives every evening its morning, or by extension every night its morning. So basically God Almighty. So your information has come to me by God Almighty. So that takes care of khabar, and as you can see, garam khabar, right? Khabar garam hai, matlab it is hot, it is recent, it is in circulation at this point in time. Moving on to the next word, पुर्जे. थी खबर गर्म कि गालिब के उड़ेंगे पुर्जे. Now that's again an interesting word. It's not complex. We still use it in our vocabulary. Now पुर्जे can mean many things. It can mean pieces. It can mean shards of something. It can mean components or parts of something. दाग दहलवी का ये शेर, हमारे खत के तो पुर्जे किए पड़ा भी नहीं. हमारे खत के तो पुर्जे किए पड़ा भी नहीं. सुना जो तूने बादिल वो पैगाम किसका था. पयाम किसका था. My apologies, not पैगाम, पयाम किसका था. So the approximate translation is, of my letter what you did was tear it into pieces. So, beloved, tell me, who was it who was able to deliver their message to you, or who was it whose message got delivered to you? Because as far as I am concerned, my letter was torn into pieces by you. वासी शाह का ये शेर, गली में दर्द के पुर्जे तलाश करती थी. गली में दर्द के पुर्जे तलाश करती थी, मेरे खतूत के टुकड़े तलाश करती थी. So the approximate translation is, in the streets somebody was looking for pieces of pain. In the streets somebody was looking for pieces of my letter or fragments of my letter. आयशा अयूब का ये शेर, पुर्जे वो खत के आज भी रखे हैं मेरे पास. पुर्जे वो खत के आज भी रखे हैं मेरे पास, जो बच गए थे खत को जलाने के बावजूद. So the approximate translation is, even today I have with me those saved pieces of letters that somehow were spared after going through the fire that was set to burn those letters. वो क्या है वो गज़ल, तेरे खत आज मैं गंगा में बहा आया हूँ, आग बहते हुए पानी में लगाया हूँ, वो याद आ रहा है. But coming back to the couplet, so yeah, I still have saved pieces of that letter which was burnt. And last one, बेखुद दहलवी का ये शेर, तुम्हारी याद मेरा दिल. तुम्हारी याद मेरा दिल, ये दोनों चलते पुर्जे हैं. जो इनमें से कोई मिटता मुझे पहले मिटा जाता. Again, a lovely couplet. So the approximate translation is, your memory and my heart. These are the two components that keep things moving. If any of these components was to be destroyed, it would get destroyed in a process that would self-destroy me too. Yeah, that's a little long-winded, but yeah, that's the approximate translation. So that takes care of पुर्जे. हम लोगों ने उसके multiple usages देखे. एक तो बहुत common usage है पुर्जे pieces of paper. And then of course ये last वाले शेर में पुर्जे as a component, as a part of something. Moving on to तमाशा. देखने हम भी गए थे पर तमाशा ना हुआ. So tamasha is used to describe some kind of spectacle, some kind of show, some kind of exhibition of something, right? Usually with a connotation of amusement and entertainment, right? So that is what tamasha is. अब अपने मिर्ज़ा गालिब का ही ये शेर, बाजी चाय अतफाल है दुनिया मेरे आगे, होता है शब रोज़ तमाशा मेरे आगे. We covered it in the last episode also. The approximate translation is that in front of me, this entire world and the people in it are just like a huge playground for kids, where the world is the playground and all the people are kids playing in it. That is how I perceive the world, and every day, day in, day out, I see this spectacle, this entertaining spectacle, where people are behaving like kids in the playground called world. मिर्ज़ा गालिब का ही एक और शेर, जमा करते हो क्यों रकीबों को, जमा करते हो क्यों रकीबों को, एक तमाशा हुआ गिला ना हुआ. So the approximate translation is, and it is addressed to the beloved, that beloved, why are you collecting this whole crowd of rivals, right? It almost seems that this is going to be a spectacle for entertainment and amusement rather than you sharing with me the complaints you have against me. Why such a public show of you complaining against me, right? Why couldn't we do it one-on-one? Why put up a show for everybody's entertainment? सागर सिद्दीकी का ये शेर, ये भी बहुत प्यारा शेर है. वो बुलाएं तो क्या तमाशा हो, वो बुलाएं तो क्या तमाशा हो, हम ना जाएं तो क्या तमाशा हो. I love it. Probably my favorite share from the episode. So the approximate translation is, she would call me. What a spectacle that would be. I would not go. What a spectacle that would be. So the couplet very beautifully captures the two impossible things, right? The first impossible thing, that the beloved would call the lover. And the second impossible thing, that if the beloved was to call the lover, he would not go. Both things pretty much are not possible. If they ever happen, that would be a huge spectacle to watch. Zafar Iqbal का ये शेर, खामोशी अच्छी नहीं इनकार होना चाहिए, खामोशी अच्छी नहीं इनकार होना चाहिए, ये तमाशा अब सरे बाजार होना चाहिए. So again, approximate translation, it's a very nice couplet. The approximate translation is, the time for silence is over. Now, if you have to say no, then say it. If you have to say no, then say it, because now this spectacle should become public. Now this spectacle should become obvious. Silence is not going to cut it anymore. So that takes care of all the key words, khabar, purze, tamasha. Now let's start getting into the impression. We'll take it bit by bit. First line, thi khabar garm. It is an interesting phrase in Urdu language, and of course is used to describe some kind of news or information which is hot. In English language and English vocabulary, we also have similar phrases that capture this sentiment. Things like burning topic of the day, right? Hot off the presses, talk of the town. These are all phrases again used to describe a very hot topic which is in circulation at this point in time, which is exciting everybody at this point in time. And all these phrases have, give or take, three common characteristics, right? Or three common criteria to be used. Number one, the news should have an urgency to it. Usually time bound, but not necessarily so, right? But it should have an urgency to it. Secondly, the news to be called hot should have some kind of relevance, high relevance in some particular context. So it should be relevant. And then thirdly, it should have a public appeal, if you may, right? It should be of public interest. As long as these three criteria are met, yes, the news or the piece of information or the topic under discussion can be justifiably called hot. Garam khabar, khabar garam, right? बात गौर करने की ये है that Ghalib here cleverly captures the high levels of interest, the high levels of excitement in people around him. for witnessing Ghalib's उड़ेंगे पुर्जे सिनारियो, राइट. सो जब वो कहते हैं थी खबर गर्म, गालिब इज inevitably, tactfully, cleverly emphasizing the fact that there is a huge amount of interest. That brings us to the second part of the first line. Now, this is also another interesting phrase in Urdu language, and once again, we have similar phrases in English vocabulary for this. Things like blown to smithereens. Now, smithereen is an Irish word, and blown to smithereens means broken into very small pieces, right? Shattered into very small pieces, which can never be put back again. Another phrase is do a demolition job on something, which means you plan a critical attack on something publicly. In today's world, it is usually through media, but otherwise publicly, right? So that would be doing a demolishing job on someone. Then another phrase is wrecking ball or demolition ball. So basically, these are those huge balls, right? Which when they will strike against a structure, the structure will be shattered, razed to ground. It cannot be put back together. And then the last one which comes to mind is blow something off the map. Again, that means you destroy something so decisively that it doesn't exist anymore. After you have destroyed it, one could almost think that thing never happened, that thing never existed. The map will have no sign of it at all. That is the decisiveness of destruction. So, as we covered in the keywords, purze, Ghalib ke udenge purze. So, purze is usually used for pieces of paper. It can be used for parts, it can be used for components, but हम लोगों ने जो उर्दू पोइट्री में यूजेज देखा बाकी लोगों के कपलेट से, it is usually about pieces of paper. Now, when Ghalib adds udenge to it, udenge purze, right? It kind of reconfirms our understanding that probably in today's couplet, Ghalib is describing purze that are like pieces of paper flying. And this is the exact anchor we decided to choose for our impression today. So the anchor is that Ghalib is talking about him being blown to pieces of paper, and having those pieces of paper fly all over. So that is what we are going to anchor the impression in. Now, we think this is a very clever play of words by Ghalib, right? Because if you keep in mind the person in focus here, which is Ghalib, you keep his reputation in mind, which was that of an accomplished shair, famous for his written poetry, then when you think कि गालिब के उड़ेंगे पुर्जे, you get a very strong sense that probably गालिब के उड़ेंगे पुर्जे is actually गालिब की शायरी के उड़ेंगे पुर्जे. His शायरी being the written word, right, from him, the written poetry from him, and उस शायरी के उड़ेंगे पुर्जे, because of course everything is written on paper, right? So when they say blow off Ghalib into pieces, by extension it is blow off Ghalib's shairi into pieces. Now, the question that comes to mind is why? Oh, why there would be so much interest and excitement in the public to seeing poetry of a poet as accomplished and as masterful as Ghalib being blown to pieces, being demolished. Why would the public have so much excitement and interest in this? On a normal day, the expected reaction from public towards a poet of such high caliber should be supporting the poet, encouraging the poet, praising the poet. Then, why did Ghalib receive such an extreme opposite reaction? Why was the public so excited to see him, and by extension his poetry, blown off to pieces? The answer probably lies in the cultural and political environment around Ghalib, which was filled with change, competition, and transformation. All around one could see this, and Urdu poetry, like all other things, did not remain untouched by this change, by this competition, and by this transformation. So, for today's DGMZ impression, we will adopt a slightly different approach. For today's impression, we will rely heavily on narratives. Narratives where Ghalib found himself in situations where he and his poetry were potentially challenged, humiliated, mocked, or undermined in some way, in an effort to Ghalib ke udenge purse, in an effort to tamasha, right? Those are the ones we will focus on. So, keeping in mind the typical political, cultural, social background against which Urdu poetry was getting created in Ghalib's time, there was definitely a very strong competition among shayars and Urdu poets to prove their mettle and gain favor in the eyes of the emperor, at that time Bahadur Shah Zafar, in addition to, of course, gaining fame among the public. Bahadur Shah Zafar was not only the biggest patron of this art form of Urdu poetry, he himself was an accomplished shayer and a poet in his own right. For Ghalib, being acknowledged as an Urdu poet worthy of admittance to Bahadur Shah Zafar's royal court was both a matter of prestige and a rightfully deserved patronage from the emperor. Now here comes the interesting part. The biggest hurdle standing between Ghalib and emperor's patronage was Sheikh Muhammad Ibrahim Zauq. Zauq was appointed poet laureate at the royal court at the young age of 19 years, and he continued to rule in this role till his death. That was the type of monopoly he had. That was the type of monopoly he had in the emperor's court as far as poets go. During Ghalib's time, Zauq was the poet in the court of Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar. In addition, Zauq also served as a mentor to the emperor. Mentor for what? Urdu poetry, art forms, right? So Zauq was the emperor's mentor also. If you are a veteran DGMZ viewer, you know we quote a lot of couplets from Zauq as part of our impression. In fact, we quote a lot of couplets from Bahadur Shah Zafar as part of our impressions. So just to re-emphasize the fact that both these personalities were great poets. Now, the rivalry between Mirza Asadullah Khan Ghalib and Sheikh Muhammad Ibrahim Zauq is famous. And it is called the Clash of the Titans, right, of 19th century in Urdu poetry world. Their rivalry surpassed petty competition, which would exist in any two people doing the same thing. Their rivalry went beyond to encompass the changing landscape and poetic evolution of Urdu literature. Their rivalry focused on the tension between tradition and innovation. Their contrasting styles and philosophies till date are a hot topic, right? Garam khabar, right? A hot topic of interest within scholars and poetry lovers. Now, one of the most famous incidents of rivalry between the two poets resulted in one of the finest ghazals that Ghalib ever wrote. And it is hard to pick fine ghazals from Ghalib's collection. We all know that. And this incident is a good narrative for the scenario that we are capturing in today's couplet की थी खबर गर्म कि गालिब के उड़ेंगे पुर्जे देखने हम भी गए थे तमाशा ना हुआ. So this is how the incident goes. Ghalib was sitting with his friends in the marketplace when the palki, or the palanquin as we call it in English, of Zawq passed by. Ghalib is said to have passed a snide taunt or comment at Zawq, saying, "Hua hai sheikh ka musahib, fire hai itrata." It translates to, having become the king's choicest companion, now he moves around in pride and arrogance just because he's chosen as king's favorite companion. It is said that Zawq continued on his way without responding, but then later complained to the emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar about Ghalib's taunt and snide remark. Now, on Zawq's recommendation, Ghalib was then invited to the next royal mushaira at the palace. The idea behind it probably was to hold Ghalib accountable for his misbehavior towards Zawq, and in some way ridicule or humiliate Ghalib or penalize Ghalib for the same. यहाँ पे आपको वो फ्लेवर मिलने लगेगा उड़ेंगे पुरसे, राइट? अ प्लान की गालिब के उड़ेंगे पुरसे. As expected and probably planned, at the Mushaira, Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar confronted Ghalib about his snide remark and taunt at Zawq the other day in the marketplace. Ghalib, who is well known for his hazir jawabi, or spontaneity as we call it, confessed that yes, it was he who made the comment, but then went on to say that the comment had nothing to do with Zawq at all. When asked to explain, Ghalib said the fact of the matter was that the comment was actually the first line, which is known as Misra, of his last couplet, Maqta, of his latest Ghazal. First line of the last couplet is what I recited in the marketplace. It had nothing to do with Zawq. That was Ghalib's explanation. Now, that was a clever remark, because you certainly would not hold against a shair or poet the recitation of his shairi or poetry. But Ghalib was surrounded by no normal people. These were the best of the best, sharpest of the sharpest, biggest names in Urdu poetry, including Zawq and the emperor himself. Ghalib was promptly asked to present the entire Maqta, of which he said his comment was supposedly the first line, the Misra. Ghalib obliged and recited, "Hua hai sheikh ka musahib, phire hai itrata, wagarna sheher mein Ghalib ki abru kya hai," which translates to, having become the king's favorite companion, he now moves around in pride and arrogance. Otherwise, what does Ghalib have in terms of reputation in this city? Nothing else, except the fact that he is the emperor's favorite companion. And once this Maqta was recited, Ghalib had made the verse suddenly about himself, completely about himself, with Zawq nowhere in the picture. Ghalib received a huge applause from the audience, but Zauq understood that Ghalib had crafted the second line on the spot in an effort to save his face. Now, Zauq understood this. So, in an effort to expose this stunt that Ghalib had pulled, Zauq further insisted that Ghalib should recite the entire ghazal. It is said that Ghalib pulled out a piece of paper, goes on to recite the entire ghazal. हर एक बात पे कहते हो तुम कि तू क्या है, तुम ही कहो कि ये अंदाज़े गुफ्तगू क्या है, जला है जिस्म जहां दिल भी जल गया होगा, कुरेदते हो जो अब राख जुस्तजू क्या है, रही न ताकते गुफ्तार और अगर हो भी तो किस उम्मीद पे कहिए कि आरजू क्या है, रगों में दौड़ते फिरने के हम नहीं कायल, जब आँख ही से ना टपका तो फिर लहू क्या है. एंड ऑफ कोर्स वी कवर्ड द मक्ता ऑफ इट. हुआ है शेख का मुसाहिब, फिरे है इतराता, वगरना शहर में गालिब की आबरू क्या है. He recites the ghazal from the paper. Now the big catch is there was nothing on the paper. The ghazal was composed by Ghalib on the spot, and he recited it from a blank sheet of paper. Blank sheet of paper on the spot. And the ghazal went on to become one of the most famous, most classic ghazals of his entire repertoire. And of course, once he had finished reciting the ghazal, the audience were mesmerized, and Ghalib received a standing ovation. Now, these audience actually believed that Ghalib, when he commented and taunted Zauq, he was not doing that. It was actually the misra of his maqta, and this is the ghazal that he had compiled. He was just reciting the misra. Zauq, on the other hand, knew there was no misra, there was no maqta, there was no ghazal. And for someone of Zauq's caliber to watch Ghalib spin a masterpiece on the spot, it just amazes us. I mean, one cannot even comprehend the thought, the emotion that Zauq would have felt to be face to face with this type of talent, right? And in the serial, right, the much famous Mirza Ghalib serial on Doordarshan, the episode is excellent. Nasruddin Shah as Ghalib, Shafi Inamdar as Zauq, right? Beautiful interaction. We will put the video for you to enjoy in the end screen. And while we are on that topic, always check out the end screen. We do take a lot of effort to choose videos for it. It's not always our own playlists and subscribe hover card. We also put videos and links for you that would add to your enjoyment of the episode. Okay, so that was one very famous incident. You will find lot of narrations, not lot of narratives, and of course in the serial it is captured very well, where yes, थी खबर गर्म कि गालिब के उड़ेंगे पुर्जे, बुलाया उसको मुशायरे में, कोर्ट में, ये सोच के बुलाया कि इसको बोलेंगे ये क्या बदतमीजी है, right? ऐसे in the marketplace, royal poet was passing by and you passed such a comment. Ghalib goes there, the whole royal entourage of poets are gathered to see this face off, if you may, right? And what does Ghalib do? He flips the whole thing on its head. He says, this is not a comment, this is a misra from my ghazal, and on the spot creates a masterpiece. A masterpiece. So that is one incident. Another similar incident, which was meant to drag down Ghalib and his poetry, is around the most famous Sehra by Mirza Ghalib. People say one of the most famous Sehras ever written. So let's begin with what is a Sehra. The art of writing Sehra or Prothalmion, if I'm pronouncing that right, is an old art form which is not much used these days. But there was a time back in the day that almost all weddings would have a Sehra crafted and read after the Nikah marriage ceremony by a close relative, usually someone with poetic talent. Though the technical focus and objective of Sehra was to praise the bride and the groom and to pray for a blessed wedded life for them, it used to be also used as a tool to bring in some humor, some praise, and some wit in terms of describing all the relatives of the bride and the groom, right? Their personalities or their quirks or their temperaments were also written about in a very witty and funny way to add to the enjoyment of the whole thing. Almost sounds like a toast that we do in today's world. And then once the wedding was done, all the guests were given a copy of the Sehra. So that is the background of what Sehra was. Sehra technically falls in the category of nazms, and hence it has to be in a meter. Now this is how the narrative for this incident goes. It was the last grand Mughal wedding on 2nd April 1852 of Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar's son Jawan Bakht to Nawab Shah Zamani Begum. Emperor's favorite and youngest wife, Zeenat Mahal Begum, asked Ghalib to write a Sehra for her son Mirza Jawan Bakht's wedding. Technically, this honor should have gone to Sheikh Ibrahim Zauq because he was the royal court-appointed poet. But it is said that Zauq was unwell and hence Zeenat Mahal asked Ghalib to write the Sehra. It is said Ghalib wrote a beautiful Sehra, but true to his nature, he could not resist the opportunity to take a dig at Zauq or taunt Zauq, and therefore Ghalib concluded his Sehra with a Makta, which is the last couplet, that in essence claimed that no one in the gathering can craft a better Sehra than Ghalib. So this is the Makta of that Sehra that Ghalib wrote. हम सुखन फैम हैं गालिब के तरफदार नहीं. हम सुखन फैम हैं गालिब के तरफदार नहीं. देखें कह दे कोई इस सहरे से बढ़कर सहरा. The approximate translation is, we are connoisseurs of poetry. We are not partial to Ghalib. But let's see if there's anyone in this gathering who can write a better Sehra than this. Now the emperor was not very pleased with Ghalib's Makta and took this open challenge thrown at his mentor and royal poet Zauq very personally. So what does the emperor do? He urges Zauq to write in response another Sehra. And Zauq, it is said, masterfully crafted a beautiful Sehra in which he weaved his sharp response to Ghalib's taunting remark. So this is what Zauq wrote. जिनको दावा हो सुखन का ये सुना दो उनको. जिनको दावा हो सुखन का ये सुना दो उनको. देख इस तरह से कहते हैं सुखनवर सहरा. Approximate translation is, tell those who claim to be the best at writing. This is how the best poets actually write a Sehra. It is recorded that the crown prince at that time, Mirza Fakhruddin, who was also a disciple of Zauq, exclaimed, Ustad ne maidan maar liya. Which means that, oh wow, the master has won this round, right? By master, of course, he meant Zog. Also, William Dalrymple in his book, The Last Mughal, writes, the marriage procession of Prince Jawan Bakht left the Lahore gate of the Red Fort at 2 a.m. on the hot summer night of 2nd April 1852. And he goes on to write that what was remembered longest and discussed most eagerly, khabar thi garam, right, was not so much the festivities or the feasting or the fireworks as the marriage odes, which is the Sehra, recited by the poet laureate Zog and his rival Mirza Nausha, who more widely known by his pen name, now more widely known by his pen name Ghalib. Well, the incident was not over. Ghalib had to apologize for this clash with Zog. So he wrote the celebrated Yaktaai Mazarat letter of apology in response to the emperor's reaction. So he had to apologize to the emperor about the challenge or clash he had with his mentor and royal poet Zog. It is said in this letter of apology, once again, Ghalib leveraged every opportunity to prove his supremacy. In almost every verse, Ghalib once again taunted and commented at Zog's ancestry and the emperor's negligence, right? सादिक हूँ अपने कौल में गालिब खुदा गवाह, सादिक हूँ अपने कौल में गालिब खुदा गवाह, कहता हूँ सच कि झूठ की आदत नहीं मुझे. The translation is, always true to his word, Ghalib is, and God is his witness for this. He always tells the truth, he never lies. So once again, this incident is also a very good example of how events would evolve to a point where Ghalib would be put in a position where there was huge potential for him and by extension his poetry, primarily his poetry, to be ridiculed, to be questioned, to be challenged, where Ghalib would be put in a position where he would have to apologize for his unapologetic poetry. Now, despite these two narratives and many more around Ghalib and Zog's rivalry, one has to be fair and acknowledge that there was mutual respect and admiration between both poets, right? Zog was a poet of great caliber in his own right and admired Ghalib's talent. The problem Zog had with Ghalib was Ghalib's lifestyle, right, which consisted of gambling and drinking and many times speaking against religious traditions, cultural traditions, being a convention breaker, so to speak. That was Ghalib's personality, that was his lifestyle, persona, so to speak. Zog actually disapproved of that. Ghalib's poetry and talent was not what he disapproved of. But because of this lifestyle and persona, Zog thought that Ghalib was unfit for positions at the royal court, which are supposed to be positions of high esteem and high respect. Even Ghalib had respect for Zog. Ghalib has quoted Zog in many of his couplets. Of course, they are not praising Zog, but Ghalib never Ghalib never praised anyone. That was not the style of his poetry. He never wrote just laudatory praises of anyone, including God. His style of poetry was very different. It was very questioning. It was very philosophical, right? So, but he does quote Zog a lot. It is said that after Zog's death, Ghalib was appointed at the court as the ruler's ustad and was bestowed with titles like Najam-ud-Dawla, Nabir-e-Mulk, Nizam-e-Jang, and Mirza Nausha. He was also appointed as a historian of the Mughal court in 1855. So, Ghalib and Zauq's rivalry was a good background in terms of narratives for the couplet we have today. Now, clearly, those Zauq and Ghalib incidents were popular because of the royal court serving as the backdrop for it, even outside the court. Ghalib was a favorite target for getting snared into controversial situations by his peers and poets, who felt extremely threatened by Ghalib's raw and intense talent. The threat to his peers and colleagues was twofold. Number one, they did not have Ghalib's talent. Number two, they did not understand Ghalib's talent. And Ghalib captures this twofold threat very well in the very first ghazal of his Diwan, where he says, "Aage hi dame shanidan jis kadar chahe bichhaye." आगे ही दामे शनीदन जिस कदर चाहे बिछाए मुद्दा अनका है अपने आलमे तकरीर का. The approximate translation is that everyone around me can cast as wide a net as they want in their effort to catch it, in their effort to understand it, in their effort to control it. But the fact of the matter is that what I speak, what I mean, is like that elusive anka bird. In English, there is a similar bird called phoenix, right? So Ghalib says, my meaning, my poetry, the essence of my poetry is like that elusive bird. You can cast as many nets as you want. You can try as much as you want. You will never be able to catch it, control it, capture it. So, yes, you can understand my poetry, but you can never understand it completely. It's impossible. And that was a big threat. That was a big threat for his colleagues and peers. So, in DGMZ's humble opinion, this Maqta refers to the huge collection of such incidents where there used to be, number one, lot of excitement and curiosity built up in the public, including Ghalib's peers and competitors. Number two, excitement was about what? About Ghalib being cornered, being challenged, being humiliated, being brought down a peg or two. Number three, huge would be the gatherings in anticipation of this spectacle. So, थी खबर गर्म की गालिब के उड़ेंगे पुर्जे देखने हम भी गए थे पर तमाशा न हुआ. Number four, such spectacle, though much anticipated, never happens. पर तमाशा न हुआ. And this used to build up, and then the spectacle would never happen. Many times, many occurrences. Now, the couplet stops here, right? But in our impression, we want to go a step further. So, okay, तमाशा ना हुआ. खबर गर्म हुई, गालिब के पुर्जे उड़ेंगे, सब लोग इकट्ठे हुए पर तमाशा ना हुआ. तो फिर हुआ क्या? What actually did happen? What actually did happen was that Ghalib, most of the times, comes out of this whole predicament shining brighter than before, proving the naysayers wrong, silencing competition, amazing the public with his power as a shire, with his power as a thinker, with his power as a philosopher. This Maqta is a lovely glimpse into the continuous string of challenges and curveballs that was sent Ghalib's way, and how he masterfully took them in his stride and played them in a way that converted these curveballs into masterful strokes. आप सोच लीजिए, ऑन द स्पॉट गज़ल masterpiece बनी बाद में. It was supposed to be a curveball and he turned it into a master stroke. And like we always say at DGMZ, there are very few people who have this ability of alchemy. You throw iron at them and they convert it into gold. Ghalib's power to alchemize bad into good was his poetry. His poetry was given that magical power that you would throw scraps of iron at Ghalib and he would convert it into gold and throw it back at you. And you would be amazed. You would be amazed. So, that brings us to the end of थी खबर गर्म कि गालिब के उड़ेंगे पुर्जे देखने हम भी गए थे पर तमाशा ना हुआ. I hope you enjoyed the episode, not to mention the stories, the narratives that we picked to support the impression. Let us know via comments how you felt about the Makta. Now, today is a special episode because we complete this ghazal. We have now completed the entire Ghazal 23 from Diwan-e-Ghalib, Dar-Khur-e Qahr-o-Ghazab, Jab Koi Hamsa Na Hua. So, share your feedback not just for this episode but for the entire Ghazal. How do you feel about the Ghazal after going through all the 9 episodes we crafted for it? Like I always say, your comments, your feedback are the strongest motivation for us to keep putting in the time and effort every week to create these episodes. Now, as always, for the new viewers, a very strong recommendation to access the episode titled Introduction to DGMC, because that will give you a good insight into the motivation, the inspiration behind this podcast. What are we trying to do here? The homepage of the channel has multiple playlists. Feel free to surf through them and pick episodes that interest you. Now, I'm going to send a lot of love and light to all you dear viewers, and thanks for watching.